I'm Christy Cooper. I am the director and one of the producers of the feature documentary Youth v. Gov.
So this story obviously became a big story with just all that unfolded. When did you first hear about this? How did you first dive into it? I know you've been very much in communities that know about not just this type of movement, but movements in general. But I'm curious, when did this first spark for you?
Yeah, I had the real fortunate luck of being in on this story pretty early on. So Julia Olson, who is the lead attorney on this case, she started her organization in 2010, and in 2011 she filed legal actions in every state as well as a federal lawsuit on Mother's Day of that year. And along with those federal actions, Our Children's Trust, her organization, partnered with Witness, which is Peter Gabriel's social justice human rights organization. And I came on board through Witness to help create 10 short films about these young people who were suing their state governments. The films were really focused on their climate impacts at home, what their personal stories were, and the films were used as part of a grassroots campaign in somewhat to kind of build an understanding around climate litigation and how the courts can be used to address the climate crisis. The DVD was hand-delivered to President Obama at the time with the stories, and the EPA even asked if they could buy one of them, not knowing or not really understanding that they were a defendant on the federal case. So that was kind of my foray, I guess, into working with young people. I had never filmed with young people before, and that's really, it presents different challenges and different considerations to think about when you're working with minors. And I was really lucky to have worked with Witness and to have brought in so many of the human rights components to filmmaking and the ethics around filmmaking that kind of have followed me with Youth v. Gov. So some of these young plaintiffs in these early stories turned out to be plaintiffs in Youth v. Gov. So Shetez Scott Martinez from Boulder, Colorado, Kelsey Juliana from Oregon, and Jamie Lynn Butler were all some of these early plaintiffs back in 2011. They were little kids. And I had developed relationships with them during that time, as well as with Julia. I continued after those short films were made to go to law conferences every year and try to educate myself around this. And then when they filed this new lawsuit in 2015, I was kind of already on the inside of the story and was able to, when they had their first win, as you see in the film with Judge Coffin ruling in their favor, that was when I approached Julia and said, hey, can you, I want to do a feature about this, and would you give me exclusive access to the story?
Speaking about that youth movement, specifically with it dealing with climate, obviously these wonderful children, but also people like Greta out in the world doing it internationally. Has it been eye-opening to see just how big of a movement the youth and their power on social media has very much changed the whole landscape of the climate conversation? It seems like it's a fresh new one because their perspective. And was that something obviously that you wanted to capture on film?
Absolutely. When I started working on this in 2011, I don't think there wasn't a youth climate movement at that time. The climate and conservation world was very much a white, privileged kind of community who were working on this issue. And over the course of working with these young people, we had the first People's Climate March in 2014. I traveled with Shetez Scott in 2013, I believe, to Rio Plus 20, and he was asked as the youngest Indigenous climate leader to light the sacred fire and to lead the Indigenous people's march there. And this was kind of these young people were kind of the first spark of this young people's movement. Kelsey Juliana, who's the lead plaintiff in this case, or the named plaintiff, she was really a trailblazer as a young person, way before we had Greta or we had any of these youth marches, any of these climate strikes. excuse me. So over the course of filming, it was really interesting to see this movement growing, and to see more and more young people being inspired by other young people, and really realizing that their voice matters, and that they can make a change, and they can make a difference. And we have now Greta, and we have these youth climate strikes around the world, and these all really happened over the last six years, I would say 5 or 6 years. So it was really interesting for me as a storyteller and someone who was documenting this story to see that changing and to see that happening. We tried to portray that in the film to show that, while maybe the courts may be slow, and this process of using the judicial system as a means of tackling the climate crisis, during that time, these movements have grown internationally. We now have, I think there's 27 cases around the world of young people suing their governments, using their constitutions to do so, and it's amazing. Like, I think this younger generation is going to do it. They're probably the most compassionate, empathetic, engaged generation that I think we've had.
You mentioned earlier a win when a judge decided to say yes, Coffin, I believe. Obviously, there's starting to be a lot more decisions being made because there's so many more cases. On a legal perspective, how important is this to just the whole landscape of looking at it from a legal battle? Because that's just as fresh as the fact these youth people are stepping up. That this is gone into the courts, and the courts for the first time are having to deal with this.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about diving into that? Because I think that's something no one's ever seen, really.
Yeah, it's so important. These small wins that they're having in the courts are setting precedents. Judge Aiken's ruling of declaring that the climate, that the atmosphere is a right, a healthy atmosphere is a right. That was unprecedented, and these wins in the courts are so important for future climate litigations and other environmental justice battles, I guess, or fights in the courts. Just this week, our Children's Trust had a really important win or a decision in Montana. So there's still some of these state cases around the country that our Children's Trust and Julia's organization are still involved in, as well as the Juliana case, Youth v. Gov. So there's a case in Montana, and the district court there just ruled that the case can go to trial. And it's a very similar case to the Youth v. Gov story, but it's a localized case to Montana. This is huge. There's been wins in California, in New Mexico, and the Juliana case is now being taught in law schools around the country, which is just incredible. So I think the system having a greater understanding of how our constitutional rights are so intertwined with environmental justice. I think that's going to continue to be really important.
In the past, the environmental causes have kind of been sadly slipped into political kind of variants of what side you're on, even though that's still very apparent even in the film, but also in just how these legal matters are happening. I feel like the youth movement itself has really made this a much bigger issue, and like you said, precedent being set about the atmosphere being about everyone. Do you feel like doing it through the legal system is a way to kind of get off of it being a political subject matter into a life or death subject matter that needs legal representation to solidify it? Is that an importance to it being a legal battle, that it's getting past just I don't believe in climate change, or, oh, yes, we need to help our world type feeling that it has been in the past? I
do. I really do think that the judicial system, our third branch of government, is incredibly important in this process. One important thing I think for viewers to understand is that none of the administrations, and this case has gone now through Obama, Trump, and the Biden administration, there's not a single administration that is denying that climate change is happening, because they can't. They can't perjure themselves in a court of law, and the science is too strong. So in the courtroom, like this debate about whether climate change is real or not is not happening, because everyone knows that the facts are there, the science is there, and the data is there, and that's not what they're arguing. They're really arguing whether or not the courts have the government's position is whether or not the courts actually have a right to dictate how policy should look, separation of state and et cetera. So. Yeah, I do. The courts are there for instances where the government and Congress is not acting, or it's acting in a way that's harming its citizens. And that is what the judicial system is there for, is to be that third branch of government that's the check and balance, right, of when the other two branches of government are not functioning. And neither of those branches of government have addressed the climate issue. In fact, they've made it much worse. The actions that the government has taken have intensified and exacerbated the climate crisis. And we urgently need the courts to step in and to provide this protection to the citizens and to future generations, because that's what the government is supposed to be doing, is supposed to be protecting its citizens.
I know documentary filmmakers never really can relinquish a film. There's always another story to it. This one obviously has so many stories that will continue to happen. How do you tackle knowing that this isn't just one film, but a movement? And how do you document that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It was a really hard decision for us to decide to stop filming, or at least to move into the post-production phase with this film and say, like, we have captured what we need for this story, because the case is still ongoing and these kids are still in this fight, in the courtroom. But it felt urgent enough to us to get this story out there and for people to know about the Juliana case and to understand the history of how we got here and why we're here, and perhaps what that systemic solution needs to look like. And following 21 kids and their stories was also really challenging in the editing process to figure out who made it into the story, right? So there's all these other stories that we have, and we hope to use those moving forward as part of our impact campaign and as ancillary content for our educational campaign. We will continue to follow this story. It's looking increasingly likely that the case might be back on track for trial, and if that's the case, we are absolutely going to be there following this story, and really as part of our impact campaign, we're really hoping to continue to elevate these voices and continue to highlight what these young people are doing.
We're here at Bentonville, that is a festival that highlights women filmmakers in particular. So much of your story is young women making strides in their world. Not just women, but predominantly there are a lot more young women in this cause. How important is it to shine a light on that fact, that is hopefully something that is also gained through showing us this story, is that the youthful movement of women is just as strong as any other movement, and we're seeing a vast change and of new voices come into the sphere, if you will, that we've never really had, because previous, like you said, wealthy, affluent people were the only voice in this argument, and now it's not just young, but it's young women, it's young men, it's young people of color. How important was that a part of the story?
Yeah, I'm so appreciative of Bentonville Film Festival and their dedication to highlighting diverse voices and really being inclusionary around those voices, because Youth v. Gov is really about the youngest generation, and these young people that are in this film really represent the diversity of young people around the country today. We have many of the plaintiffs are Indigenous, are members of the BIPOC community, are members of the LGBTQ community, and young, as you mentioned, young women. Julia Olson herself is a trailblazer in the legal community, a mother of two, and I think over the course of documenting this story and seeing really that shift in the climate movement of being this very like white male dominated kind of movement to it really being so inclusive now, and it's really led by the young people, and it's yet led by an incredibly diverse group of young people who are able to they really understand the intersectionality of climate change and how it's so tied to environmental racism and so many other social justice issues that we are facing in our country today. And I think that was needed for this movement. I think that was really important for folks to understand that this is an economic issue, it's a health issue, it's an education issue, it's a race issue, and to tie all of that into this one topic, I think is really important. And and I've had people tell me before that this documentary is like the most diverse group of characters that they've ever seen, and that was not something that I planned. That was not something staged. It just literally is the reality of who's being impacted by climate change today. It is all of us. It's in particular marginalized communities and marginalized voices and people who have been, living in sacrifice zones and don't have as many resources to mitigate the impacts of climate change.
Can we touch on what that you just said, mitigate the climate? Because we're seeing whole populations being moved because of the climate atmosphere, what it's doing to whole parts of the world, and it in particular affecting marginalized, already socioeconomically challenged groups of people. Where will our world look like in just 10 years just from the movement of these people? Not even on a legal statement, but I feel like our world is going to be completely different, even if these cases are successful.
Yeah.
Are you seeing that on the front line, I feel like?
Yeah, I think you're right. Like, even if these cases are successful today, we've already surpassed the tipping point when it comes to the climate crisis. There's no question that we are going to experience catastrophic impacts. The question is how catastrophic will they be, or what means will we implement in our country and around the world to mitigate the worst of these impacts. We're already seeing water shortages and severe droughts. I live in Montana, and my community is in a severe drought this summer. We have water restrictions, we have water surcharges. You see many of the lakes and rivers throughout the whole Pacific Northwest and the West Coast have completely dried up. I've been living in smoke for 2 months. I'm not able to see the mountains that are a few miles away from my home. And the entire West seems to be burning. And meanwhile, we have flooding, on the East Coast, and flooding in Europe and in Germany with there's just so much suffering that's going to be happening. And we are going to have climate refugees within our own country. It's probably pretty certain that California is going to run out of water in the near future. And where are those people going to go? They're going to have to come inland. They're going to have to, these other resources are going to be tapped, and the resources are going to be short. And so I don't know. It feels dire at times. It feels really scary. But I think, I think that's why, for instance, the infrastructure bill that the Biden administration is trying to pass right now is so important, because many of these infrastructures that they're planning on are addressing climate change from a mitigation standpoint, whether that's seawalls or creating other resources and technologies in order for us to actually withstand a lot of these impacts. And I think a lot of resources are going to have to be thrown at that. Instead of, in addition to fighting climate change, we're going to be now, trying to protect ourselves from the impacts of that.
I feel like your film asks for people to step up. How can people do their part in helping this movement, even if just the smallest website they can go to or thing that they can do? What would you recommend for people that don't know what to do but want to be a part of this?
Yeah. So we welcome people to go to our website. It's youthvgovfilm.com. We have a take action button that'll bring you to a page filled with all kinds of actions that you can take. We're really excited that we've just hired an impact team, a young, diverse group of activists who have come on board with us to work with us around the country within communities to hold their local, their state, their federal governments accountable on the climate crisis. So we're hopefully very soon going to have a lot of actions that people can plug into. And in the meantime, I would just encourage people to really support the youth who are leading this cause, and that can that can be through a myriad of support, from financial support to providing a place, an actual location for young people to meet and to connect with each other and to build their communities. It can be parents and grandparents or coaches driving their kids to their state representatives to testify. There's so many ways that we can support these young people in this work, and while we hope to inspire and support young people in this work, we also want the older generations to be there as a support network for them. I was just having a conversation with someone yesterday around, for a long time, I think we've been told that we need to recycle, we need to be vegan, we need to, ride our bikes and make all these changes as consumers or as citizens, and that the onus is on us. And with our story, yes, we still want people to take those actions. I think those are just in general great for your quality of life and for the planet in general, but it's not enough. We need systemic change. And so we're really encouraging folks to, yes, take all those personal actions that you can take, but also hold your government accountable and work towards the systemic change that we need of getting our country off of fossil fuels, because our entire system, our entire economy is fossil fuel based. And until we make those systemic changes, it's going to be really difficult for us as individuals to create the big change that's needed. So really it's about who's representing us, what's their focus, what do they care about, and we really need climate change to be a #1 top priority.
Well, thank you for being involved in this issue for a decade plus now, but taking the steps to put it on screen, to give it a voice that maybe isn't just locked away in a room of judges and lawyers. Thank you for that, but also thank you for bringing it to Bentonville. And like we talked about before, I turned on the camera. This is something you've taken across the country. It's a movement that is global based, so I can't wait to see how many more people can be moved by this film as much as we have, because we've followed you now for quite a few number of festivals and years now. Thank you for continuing this story, and can't wait to see what's next. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been a real honor to talk with you about this. Thank you.